Then there's Billy Jack Haynes, who also got the dark side of the ring treatment. The first I ever saw of Billy Jack Haynes was him getting busted open by Hercules and his chain at the Silverdome at WrestleMania 3. The Battle of the Full Nelsons. I even had his LJN figure. That was the year that I started watching wrestling. I had no concept of his run in the Pacific Northwest, which is where he had his greatest success. He was a world champion there. Otherwise, I saw him as a middle of the card guy who disappeared pretty quickly and was never really heard from again, not on a national level. Over the last 20 or so years, he made more headlines for his shoot interviews and all of his outlandish stories that you have to take with a mound of salt, whether you believe them or not. The man knows how to tell a story, I'll give him that. But that man is also awaiting trial on second-degree murder charges in the death of his wife last year. He was set to go on trial this December, but just this week, a judge deemed him mentally unfit to stand trial. So now there's a question about whether he'll even stand trial at all for what happened. What great timing, by the way, with that news dropping right after his Dark Side of the Ring episode happened to air. So that makes this a little more newsworthy. So how did we get here? Let's dive into this episode here. Billy was already in trouble with the law before he ever even set foot in a wrestling ring. He had 2 assault charges before his 30th birthday. He's listed as being trained by Stu Hart, but in the episode they said he was too tough with the other students, so much so that Stu threw him out of the dungeon. But when he debuted, though, if you look, he was teaming with a lot of the family members like Brett and Bruce and Jim Neidhart, so I'm not sure about him being thrown out. He took the name Billy Jack from a movie of the same name that came out in 1971. And the man who co-produced and starred in the movie threatened to sue him over it. So he just went and added his real last name to the end of it, which is how he came up with Billy Jack Haynes. He ended up in the WWF in 1986, feuded with Randy Savage for a little bit for the Intercontinental title. He had the feud with Hercules that I mentioned earlier, and then he ended up in a tag team with Ken Patera, who they interviewed for this episode, the McDonald's man himself. The 2 of them were called the Oregon Lumberjacks. They had a bunch of matches with Demolition. They actually wrestled and lost to Demolition in a dark match on the undercard of that NBC special that did 33 million viewers when Andre beat Hogan for the belt. I believe that was his last match in the WWF. Not a lot of stories about him from the WWF days. There are 2 of them out there, neither of which were mentioned here. One is the time that he beat the shit out of Iron Mike Sharp, who's one of my all-time favorite job guys. Every punch he threw, every move he took, he would scream, "Ah, ah." That was Iron Mike Sharp. But Iron Mike would sometimes work a little stiff. I know it's hard to believe, but he would work a little stiff sometimes. Nothing malicious or anything like that, but he would lay his shots in. And one night he worked a little too stiff for Billy's liking. So they finished the match, and when they got to the back, Billy Jack beat the piss out of him. And the other story, Greg Valentine told this one in a shoot interview. They were on a flight once. It might have been the same flight. Greg was sitting with Honky Tonk Man, who gave him some GHB to take. He says, it's supposed to help you burn fat. I don't know how accurate that is, but it can also knock you out. And that's what it did to Greg. He was passed out on the flight. Billy took GHB as well. And he also was out like a light. Only when the stewardess came around to ask what they wanted for breakfast, Honky Tonk, he's sitting next to him. He woke up Greg, because Greg was sitting there with his mouth open. He's drooling all over himself from the GHB. Honky woke him up. When they asked Billy what he wanted, there was nobody there to wake him up, and he was unresponsive. His mouth is open, he's drooling, and they thought he was overdosing or having some kind of medical episode. So they had to land the plane and get him off the plane. And Greg claims that's what led to Billy being fired from the WWF. In the episode, they actually interviewed Billy from jail. They flashed a message on screen that said, several months after his arrest, Dark Side of the Ring received an unsolicited offer on behalf of Billy Jack Haynes. Haynes asked to sit down with us for an interview. And there's a part of the interview where he turns to his lawyer off camera and asks if he should tell the story about the plane. And the lawyer says, well, it happened. So Billy says he overdosed on a plane and they had to shock him twice to bring him back to life, and that's what led to him being fired. I assume that's the story that Greg was referring to. Maybe some of the details are fuzzy, but it's probably the same story. And Billy wasn't someone they ever brought back for another run or like special appearances or anything like that. Like when he was done, he was done. And that's the last we ever saw of Billy Jack Haynes in WWE. After that, he went back to Portland to work for Don Owen. He quit working for Don Owen. He buried him in the media, the same Don Owen that gave him his big break. And he started his own promotion to compete with him. And that didn't last very long. He crashed and burned there, left a lot of guys hanging in the process, and it just completely killed his reputation. And he blamed it on the pills that he was hooked on at the time. So he did get a run under a mask working for WCW, but he got fired there too. And years later, after his wrestling career fizzled out, he got involved in a lot of very shady shit. And he started to make wild claims. He claimed that he was a cocaine dealer and he delivered coke to one of the Bee Gees in 1978. There was an old shoot interview where he claimed Vince McMahon Sr. might be his real father. There was another interview where he claimed Vince McMahon Jr. was Daniel Benoit's real father, and either Vince killed the entire Benoit family or Chris found out that Vince was having an affair with Nancy and he snapped. I swear that's what he said. It was from an RF video shoot in 2009. This is what we're dealing with here. You know, as Jim Cornette points out, you can get away with one crazy story. Wrestlers will tell crazy stories, but when every story out of your mouth is just batshit insane, nobody is going to believe a word out of your mouth. You know, he has that in common with Hulk Hogan. Only Billy may be more of a storyteller than even Hogan is. I mean, Hogan's told some whoppers, but they're relatively harmless. Billy Jack Haynes takes it to a whole nother level, which leads us to the story of the boys on the tracks. Now, I covered this on the podcast years ago. Many, many years ago, there was a television show I used to watch called Unsolved Mysteries, which they have since rebooted for Netflix. But I mean, I'm talking the original, like OG version hosted by Robert Stack. And it would feature segments on real unsolved crimes and it would have these reenactments, right? Not unlike the way Dark Side of the Ring does. One of the stories they profiled that very first season was the death of two teenagers in Arkansas, Don Henry and Kevin Ives. And they went out hunting one night in the woods, and their bodies were found on the railroad tracks near their home. They had been run over by a train. And the train conductor, he couldn't stop in time. He ran right over him. And the medical examiner claimed the boys passed out on the tracks after smoking a large amount of marijuana, and their deaths were ruled accidental. And there were a lot of things about the case that made people very suspicious. And a grand jury later overruled that ruling because they believed the boys were murdered. And the belief now is that they were already dead before they ended up on the tracks. Somebody positioned them on the train tracks. Enter Billy Jack Haynes. Now, Billy would have been wrestling for WWE at the time that this all went down. Years and years later, he came forward and he confessed to having been involved in the cover-up. He claimed to be a drug trafficker while he was working for WWE, and that he got a call from a local politician / drug dealer in Arkansas and was asked to provide security during a drug drop because this politician suspected that some drug money was being stolen, and state police were involved as well. Billy agreed to provide security during the drug drop, and that's where he witnessed the murders of the two boys. He claims that on August 23rd, 1987, he was on those railroad tracks and he witnessed the entire thing. And when he came forward at the time, he said that he knew he could end up behind bars, or worse, he could end up dead, but he had to tell the truth so that the mother of one of the boys could finally get some closure. And he claims he wasn't taking drugs in 1987, but he was transporting cocaine from Arkansas to his home state of Oregon. Okay. The most unbelievable part about this entire thing is his claim that he wasn't taking drugs in 1987. Okay. I don't believe that for a second. Most of that fucking roster was on drugs, but the cocaine transporter over here is the one who's not doing drugs. Sure thing. Anyway, 2 days before this, he says he was wrestling King Kong Bundy in Detroit. On the day of the alleged murders, WWE ran 3 house shows, and Billy Jack is not listed on any of those. So he could very well have been, I mean, he did wrestle Bundy, I think, the day before, or whatever it was. But on that day, he wasn't wrestling any house shows. So he could very well have been in Arkansas that day. He could have been anywhere that day. You know, he could have been on fucking Mars. And based on some of the things he said, he may have been. So he said drugs were regularly being dropped along a set of train tracks near the county line, and there was a recent drop that had been intercepted. And he was being asked to make sure that did not happen again. So there was a retired Little Rock police detective who says the men were parked there when an airplane flew over, dropping parachutes with duffel bags, and that he watched people pick up those duffel bags and then leave the area. And according to Billy, all of a sudden he hears a gunshot and then a motorcycle going down the tracks, at which point one of the guys says, "Go get him." And two guys jump in a car and speed off. And Billy says the two boys were caught by two of the officers at a convenience store about a mile away. They threw the kids down on the ground, and he claims one of them was beaten to death. He swears that he himself did not kill the boys, that he only participated in disposing of their bodies. He helped get them down on the tracks and position the rifle, that they had on them right next to their bodies. Then in the episode here, Billy says the kids walked in on a drug meeting. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. One of the kids' mothers believed Billy's story, and they had news footage of her talking about how she believes him and she felt that he had everything to lose and nothing to gain by coming forward, and he got a ton of publicity out of it. And in the episode, Billy's lawyer basically told him to keep his mouth shut and not talk about it. Because again, Billy leaned in and said, well, should I? And the lawyer's like, no, he's going to shut that shit down. Now, they do say that Billy's statement about it was not taken seriously by law enforcement, and the Boys on the Tracks case remains open to this day. But that's been the story of Billy Jack Haynes for the last 20 years. It's one conspiracy theory. It's one story after another. They interviewed a reporter for the episode who had dealings in the past with Billy, and he said that he remembers telling Billy about another murder. He remembers telling him about the murder of a corrections official named Mike Frankie. And 2 months later, Billy sends him something claiming to be a witness to the Michael Frankie murder. Well, the only reason he even knew about Michael Frankie and probably ever heard the guy's name was because this reporter told him about it. And he probably didn't even remember the reporter being the one who told him about it in the first place. And now he's coming forward and saying, I had something to do with it, or I know about it, or whatever it is that he said. So again, this is what we're dealing with here. Now, Billy ended up homeless, living out of his van. There was a wrestler named Rip Oliver, another Pacific Northwest guy, who opened up his home to Billy to give him a place to live, which was nice of him to do. Billy said he found out Rip had cancer, and he only had a few months to live. So he went down to Florida to stay with him for the last 3 months of his life. But they interviewed Rip's son, Larry Oliver, for this, and he was no fan. Very clear, he was no fan of Billy Jack Haynes. I mean, you could hear the anger and disdain in his voice just talking about this. He says Billy only moved in with his dad to get a roof over his head, and if he wasn't on pills when he moved in, he damn sure was by the time he left. He said Billy stole his father's pills, his medication. There's like the strongest stuff that you could possibly ask for, Percocets, Vicodins, because this man was dying of cancer. He had only weeks left to live, and Billy was stealing the man's medication. And then Billy calls up Brian Blair, who was running the Cauliflower Alley Club at the time. And he tells him, look, Rip's dying. He needs help. He's going to lose his house. He owes back taxes and all this stuff. Well, Rip's son says his father never owed taxes. There were no back taxes. But this is what his dad told him, that Billy asked for help from the Cauliflower Alley Club, and they raised the money to help him, even though he didn't really need it. But his dad said that Billy took half the money and he gave the other half to Rip. So basically, he defrauded the Cauliflower Alley Club. And Billy says that that's bullshit. The allegation that he stole the man's pills is also bullshit. None of that ever happened, according to Billy Jack Haynes. After that, it's back to Portland, where Billy starts a relationship with an 85-year-old woman named Jan Becraft, who was the mother of his friend Todd. Todd dies in 2021, after which Billy marries Jan. And this is met by great disapproval from Jan's family. She's 85, he's 70, and a fucking nutcase. So they figure he's just using her. And Jan had dementia. Now, I don't know if she already had dementia when they met, and maybe he was taking advantage of her in that way, or if that came later on, how genuine his love for her was. I mean, they interview one of Billy's friends here who says he genuinely, deeply loved this woman. That's what he claims. mean, you can't help but look at just some of the details here and just wonder what his motivations were. I think it's fair to wonder what his motivations were here. But Jan had dementia. She would have good days, she would have bad days, and she was getting worse. Probably more bad days than good days. And that leads us to why Billy is currently incarcerated. February 8th, 2024. Billy is arrested after a 2-hour standoff with police who were responding to reports of a possible shooting at his home. And the officers said that a man they attempted to contact inside the home was not cooperative, was believed to be armed. So they called in a tactical team, and the man eventually came out and he was detained. And when the officers went inside the home, they found the body of an 85-year-old woman who was later identified as his wife, Jan. And the medical examiner determined that she died of homicide by gunshot wound. Now, his claim is that he couldn't stand to see her suffering like that, and it was basically a mercy killing. As one of the talking heads in the episode said, "You shot your wife in the head, and that's a mercy killing?" They didn't sound convinced of that excuse. But he insists that he loved his wife with all his heart and soul, and that's why he did what he did. That's his defense. He's pleaded not guilty to murder in the second degree and the unlawful use of a weapon in connection with her death. He said he feels good about his chances with the trial set for December of this year, but the breaking news this week is that Billy Jack has been deemed unfit by a judge to stand trial in his wife's murder. Judge Angela Lucero signed an order citing a report by a certified evaluator that looked at Haynes' behavior at a recent hearing, as well as statements from his attorneys and stipulations from both the defense and prosecution that he is unfit. And he has been ordered sent to the Oregon State Hospital. The next step is a fitness to proceed hearing set for May 20th, and if he's deemed fit to proceed, then the trial will begin as scheduled in December, and if not, then it won't. And this is now what Billy Jack Haynes will be known for. He'll be known for killing his wife. It's like the stuff with Jimmy Snuka and his girlfriend, or the Benoit stuff. Like, it's a stain on their legacies that now follows them to their graves. Haynes wasn't really that big of a star outside of Portland. You know, he worked a lot of different places. He had a good look, big, strong guy, and he worked with some notable names. He even tagged with Hulk Hogan a few times in the WWF. But when people think about Billy Jack Haynes, they're going to think of the guy who killed his wife and all of the batshit crazy conspiracy theory stuff that he talked about in his shoot interviews, which could be very entertaining. I mean, the guy is a character, but he's not one of the more influential or notable names in the history of the business.